Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Behind the Lava Lava. I'm together here with a bunch of my fellow podcasters, Prez Michael, Spencer, and Milford here with me. We are going to talk a little bit about anything that's going on right now. I think this is the first time in 2025 that we've all been together. So, what's up, guys?
It's been a long
Hopefully,
time.
yeah, I know it's been a minute. So, majority of last year, I think for the better half of last year, I was in Samoa, and then I had issues with my laptop. So now I got a new laptop, so I'm pretty happy with it. But other than that, man, so there's been a lot of changes since we got together, the four of us here, behind the lava lava, and specifically changes going on in our government, specifically in the military. All this DEI stuff, being thrown out. I know that's like 2 or 3 weeks ago. That's a topic that's been, on everybody's radar. But let's talk about it here. See how that woke mindset, see how it affected you know my your point of view is pretty much. I mean, did it directly affect you while you were you were serving, or some issues about it? I know with the way that our military is going right now, it's getting to the point where it's becoming transparent. Maybe it's because of the whole Doge thing that's going on, but as far as that, let's. I just want to pick your thoughts on it. Take a stab at it, guys, about this whole DI. I know it's going away. What were some pros and cons personally to you? Did it affect you while you were in?
Well, what was it considered DEI when we were in, or was DEI something that was recently introduced the last past 10 years? Because when I was in, I never heard of the term DEI until a few years ago. I never really noticed any changes when I was in, especially when it came to diversity, inclusion, and well,
Equity.
equity. But for me, the only time I repped DEI was when it came to culture at events for the squadrons in the military. I would represent culture. When I'm out with the boys, I rep culture, but overall, I never saw anything DEI related when I was serving because yeah, I guess I was too busy, in my head in the game, just doing my job, focused on PT, passing my physical tests, and all these things that was included in being a Marine. So I never really noticed until it, it was something cultural, like wearing a lava lava if I was in the barracks, or going out with the boys. So to me, there wasn't really DEI during my time, and this was during what 20 2008 to 2013. So I don't know about you guys, if you guys saw more of that DEI stuff.
I think it came around during Obama's time. I think that's when it came into effect. So I think that's around his second term. So 12-ish to 15-ish, I believe. I don't really know the background here, but I know it came around during Obama's time. So
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that culturally, not just in the military, but American culture, things started trending that way around 2010. The world's going more online. Everybody's starting to weigh in on this and that. And it kind of became this cultural competition almost, where you can dunk on each other if you could identify all the ways that you were part of an oppressed class. How are you? Like, what are you? Are you a minority racially? Or the LGBTQ? Are you disabled? It's like the more qualifiers that you could check off, the more valid your opinion was. It kind of just became this weird cultural zeitgeist where I think internet culture kind of fed all into that. People got to started really taking off with it and starting to put it into basically job hiring quotas for accepting students into schools, and then even in the military, giving preferential treatment, supposedly, eventually. But like I said, this was kind of a trend that went through. It's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly where it started and what exactly affected. I think the issue is that the more you lean into diversity quotas and giving preferential treatment for hiring based only on these specific factors such as race and things like that, eventually, if you don't have enough people showing up that check that box, you start to lower things like certain standards. That's the fear of it, right? And so, and we did kind of see some of that. I would say on the Army side of things, you saw that for like when they wanted to integrate, like Congress just declares women can now hold combat MOSs, despite in all the trial runs, women being largely ineffective at meeting the standards. The Army actually lowered the standards in a lot of fields in order to include women. Like even our current PT test, the ACFT, like that started to get rolled out in like 2010. Literally, I remember being in Afghanistan saying, "Hey, get ready for this new PT test." And like a decade later, they tried to roll it out, and they were like, "Okay, we finally got it ready after a decade of trial and error." And then they were like, "Oh, but one of the ab exercises, you have to do a leg tuck, a single leg tuck. Well, the passing standard was one. You hang from the pull-up bar and you tuck your knees to your elbows." And like 40%, I think only 40% of Army females could pass that. And so what do? Did they tell females to step it up? No, they get rid of that exercise altogether. In my mind, that's a good example of a DEI like program. And I could be off by declaring that, but to me, just some dummy from like trying to make sense of everything while I'm still in the mix of everything. That's what it felt like to me. The point where you say if not enough people of a certain group are passing the standards, the fact that you're changing the standards instead of asking people to step up to it, that's to me where it started to get dangerous for military integration. And so I think at the heart of getting rid of it all is that we're just trying to say we want this to be a merit-based military. If any place is supposed to be merit-based, it should definitely be our military. And I'm kind of all for that. But again, what we did in practice and what we did as far as what we say we did, they can be two different things. And so I'm still trying to make sense of it all like you guys. So.
I agree. The majority of a lot of the programs, specifically the standards and majority of like the military, had to be curbed in a way just to meet, certain quotas. So that way, hey, everybody's inclusive, females inclusive, and then, but I think the other side of the spectrum from, just reading and, looking into it, a lot of their arguments is that by taking this away is, kind of like, back in the day, during like the first beginning of like certain programs, like for example, the SEALs, there's certain like special ops programs where a lot of the folks, especially, Black Americans and like, colored folks, they had a 10 times harder chance to be in those positions and how they were treated from back in the day. So I guess that's where, they were trying to put a stamp on it, but like at the like the bad side of it is just now we're lowering the standards, and then that's going to affect overall, as far as like the capability of our military. So if we're not at that high standard, of meeting certain criterias, it's going to affect, I guess, different areas, especially deployment, levels, and in our military. So historically in the military, I mean, it, representation, from certain cultures and, your color, your skin, was pretty hard to get into that. So that's kind of like the argument on the other side. So, but I don't, like lowering the standards, especially females, like, especially in the Navy, with submarines, that interaction, like, I know it's just now new, but there's not really enough data to prove otherwise, saying that it'll affect, you know females being in the subs, or pregnancy rates, for females in the subs, is it going to go up? Like, this is, fairly new right now. Like, how efficient is manpower? How efficient is a unit, going to be with the integration type deal? So I guess it's too new. Like 2010 is still like yesterday, just to look into it, or for that matter.
I think at the heart of it, though, is that, like I said, we've got to be merit based. And so, like in the cases of the old days where you were barred entry because of your race or gender, that would not be merit based. That's actually the opposite of it. It's like, hey, you're black, you can't be in this. Well, how does that factor in as merit? That's why I think this was kind of like the swinging pendulum analogy. It's like in the old days, racial segregation, we were a weaker fighting force because we were barring entry because of your race or gender. But then we went too far the other way, where we took away the bars for entry, but then we started saying, but now you're preferentially hired because of your race or gender. That's still not merit based. Like, so the point is, if we want to be merit based and just get the best war fighters that we possibly can, we can't swing too far one way or the other. How you perform as an individual will determine that. But I mean, look, the sex thing is always going to be a different discussion as well, because when you talk about females who can meet that bar, which there are females like that can, but they are very much an oddity. Like, you are the fringe exception. But what comes with having a whole other gender? Well, now they have to have their own facilities, they have to have their own accommodations, and you can justify that in the military abroad, but in combat MOSs, you got a whole company full of infantrymen, and you got like 4 or 5 females that met the standard. Well, how much logistical accommodation does it take to accommodate those 4 or 5? Because they don't roll in the same facilities as everyone else, and the idea of the infantry is that you would. And so logistically, you've got to do such a gigantic overhaul. I don't know if on a logistical level it makes sense, but that's a different discussion. Overall, like, the military as a fighting force is better off when we're merit based, not swinging too far one way or the other.
When I noticed the women in our unit or squadron, they were always the fastest to get promoted, mainly because they were selected for boards. But yes, they were the fastest to get promoted, but when it came to do their job, because in maintenance, how you perform, fixing an aircraft, I was a badass. I was picked, selected for every deployment, every humanitarian, the first to respond. But I don't want to talk about myself, but the women that I've dealt with, let me tell you, they were on the lower end of the standards when it came to maintenance, mainly because, they don't have that strength. They may have the book smart, but when it came to actually performing physical things and troubleshooting, they could not perform well. But on the admin side and all that stuff that you do to get promoted, they were quick to get promoted. So that's just my experience when it came to women on the air wing side. But at the same time, it would be extreme. You'll have the women who excel, and then you have the women who, we use that term. I don't want to say it on here, but man, I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna catch flack for this, but it's real. Yeah. I think DEI did really exist when I was in, but yeah. Well, what do you think, T?
Well, I don't know. I'm laughing because I know what type of territory you're getting into. I wasn't laughing because you talk about women in this. So I'm just laughing because Mike's going there. I don't know. What about now though on the civilian side? Like we talk about it here on the military side, but it seems like what people are arguing more is for federal employees on the civilian side of things, how it's affecting them more. We got our views on whatever happened in the military, but more so what seems to be the talk isn't what's going on within the troops. It's the DEI for us civilian dirtbags. Hey, and what's happening in that side of things. And do you notice anything, Mike?
For DEI on Hill Air Force Base, it's like 85% white male on Hill Air Force Base. That's what I noticed, especially in my squadron. You'll have a very small percentage of minorities, and even, well, the men in, well, I would say a lot smaller percentage of women. And you would see, again, the extremes, right? You either have the women who don't perform well and don't really do their job, who show up to work in their tank tops and their blankets. Like, who brings a blanket to work? Like, and no one questions them. Why do men have to be held at the standard? You know, when you go to work, you have to wear t-shirt, jeans, or you know, you have to present yourself. But women on a different level, no one questions if they come with what's another term over tank top, a white beater, right? They come they're just on a different standard than males. But yeah, I don't wanna beat on women for this, but yeah, I always see the
Woman
extremes.
beater.
I either have the women who are extremely reliable, and you have the women who are dirtbags. But it also goes the same as men, but it's more noticeable in women because there's not a lot of women, right? So that's my experience here in government jobs. But I'm seeing a lot more women. I think it's because of DEI, but also a lot more women are applying for government jobs, so that's a good thing. So,
Well, it's like, look, let me. So I know we're going to the DoD civilian route, but like, I got to give some fairness here. Like, I'm a section leader for a combat engineer unit, just for the maintenance section, though, and I got to keep it real. That my experience has been the opposite of Michael's as far as maintenance mechanic stuff goes. As far as me, I'm a crappy mechanic because most of my career, I was not used as a mechanic. The Army used me for other stuff. And so by the time they put me into a mechanic role, my maintenance knowledge is not too great. And so I've been very reliant on very competent and capable female mechanics in the Army. So it's like, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention like the awesome performing female soldiers that I've had working with me. That I'm grateful for them. That's why I say, like, to me, it's merit based on their merits. They are great soldier mechanics. But as far as what you're going on, as far as being held to different standards, yeah, look, I'd be lying if I said like we've all seen it, especially in the ranks. It's like certain things that, you know, males will get chewed out for being slightly unshaven or missing a spot, and females will just have their hair all over the place. I'm like, it's a thing that happens. Although the Army itself is kind of getting further away from really adhering to uniform standards anyways. We're kind of getting more Air Force-ish with our observance in that, but we'll see where that pendulum swings this time. Yeah, no, I don't know. Like I've definitely worked with some high-speed females, and, you know, shout out to them.
yeah, and I'm not talking bad about women. I'm just pointing out the straight facts here because I guess how I look at it is, if women want that equality, I will put you in the same line as men. Same thing I tell my wife. If you can cook ramen noodle the same way I do, I expect you to be able to cook the same ramen noodle the same way that I've been cooking it. Because cooking ramen noodles is very simple. Boil water, dump all its content in the water, and it's ready. There's no other extra steps that you can take to mess up making ramen noodle, right? So that's just the way I view it. If women want equality, then it should be equal, you know, especially when it comes to doing your job. And in the military, if people are relying on you, you know, be held at the same standards. But isn't being held at the same standards the same as what you were talking about earlier, Spence?
All the issues you guys are bringing up, I my first job was the military, and when I got in, all those issues that we seen, and you guys, talking about, I feel that is what I dealt with in the military. It'd have been 10 times worse if I got in a civilian job. So that's why I kind of went there and kind of like went through the entrepreneur route, and I'm kind of still on that route right now. But I can imagine, just the scope of the workplace, just the standards and what you were talking about, Mike. I completely understand where you're coming from. I mean, at this point, I haven't got any workers yet, but I feel like that's something that I might, have to deal with. I mean, like I watched that gold rush, up in Alaska, and those guys are like they're going, headaches. Every season there's always new workers, and that's just the headache of what they go through. So I completely understand. I was going to talk about the LGBTQ thing with the DEI too, but because majority of them are kind of getting kicked out too. But
Before we
you know,
circle
yeah,
around
go
and
ahead.
keep circling, let's get to the root of it. Like, let's ask the right questions. Does DEI solve anything? Like, does it really give us the best candidates? Does it solve the diversity, equity, and inclusion problem within that workplace where they're being hired according to DEI? Like, I don't hate the idea of what it represents conceptually, but does it really solve anything?
All I know, if they enforce DEI for the next 10 years, I wouldn't have a job because I'm a lazy mofo. I am a lazy person when it comes to my job. I just do the minimum. And if they're expecting more than the more than the minimum, I don't know. I will probably lose my job.
Well, I think that's fair though. It's like, look, you want me to do more, then pay me more. Like I'm hitting the minimum. But I think beyond that though, like you hit the nail on the head where you're like, let's make sure we're asking the right questions. Like, first off, what even is DEI? Because we were talking about, you know, you could wear your EA in the barracks and whatnot. Like, the presence of having other cultures or even celebrating other cultures, because now I'm going from the gender thing to the racial aspect of DEI. None of that in my mind is DEI practice. It's like, look, we in the United States of America, we're called the melting pot. Melting what? Like melting different cultures that melt into one American culture. That means we're bringing people from all over, cultures from all over, and we're integrating into the American system. But we can't like turn a blind eye to where we come from. Like, and so acknowledging your cultural roots is part of that. Now, the DEI thing again just boils down to promotion, hiring, etc., based on your racial or gender or LGBTQ status. That's where it's an issue. But like, look, having like when the Army would have like an acknowledgement for Black History Month, I didn't really see that as a DEI thing. It's like, hey, we're just putting some shine on the history of our Black soldiers. When they do the same thing with the Hispanic heritage, they do the same with Pacific Islander heritage. Like, putting a shine on those things, celebrating our differences is not ultimately that predates like the terms of DEI. So it's the preferential hiring and promotion and treatment of people that are in those categories. That's where we get into the DEI territory. And so, like, again, like us celebrating our heritage as Polynesians is not begging a DEI focus. Like, it's ultimately not. I'm ready to kick the DEI stuff out of the military, but that's not me saying be quiet about where you come from. And look, and this is not just like from a minority standpoint. White soldiers do it too. I was just talking about this with some soldiers earlier, where it's like, how many white soldiers are suddenly identifying as Norse pagans, something that their families haven't even been for generations. Let's be honest. Y'all are just doing that because you want to grow beards. And that's the only way that the Army is going to allow you to do it, is suddenly you're a Viking. But hey, whatever. If that's your heritage and your preferences, that's what you want to celebrate, you do you, man. At the end of the day, just meet the bar, meet the standard.
Spence, how would that differ from what the government is doing right now, especially the military websites? They're removing anything that's related to culture. Like they removed from the web page something that was dedicated to a Native American who was part of the crew of the Marines who raised the flag on, I think it was Mount Suribachi, and they removed from the web pages, the contributions of Asians during, I forgot which war, but they've been going through their websites. I don't remember if it was only the Marine Corps or if it involved the other branches. They're going through the pages and removing all articles and anything that commemorates, ethnic groups. So
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Like, is this something that's only going to go on just for this 4 years, and then as soon as Trump gets out of office, oh, everything's gonna come back? I pose that question because a lot of things that presidents, they only have 4 years. Trump had this is his last term, and whoever's going to step up, maybe this is probably going to go back. Everything that we see right now, all the changes. It's not only that. Like it's like majority of like the heritage months that we've been, that's going away too. All of that stuff, and I mean, honestly, the question I was posed, was it very beneficial to me? It was beneficial because it was education. We were educating, people of all different races, about our, your specific race. I mean, that was one of the good things about it. But when it came down to, you know, actually, for hiring purposes, it was kind of like a detriment, especially, not having the correct, you know, all the credentials, your credential of getting this position is you're brown or you're black. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it kind of came down to. But in reality, this whole thing, that's going on in the news right now, all of a sudden, like, airplanes are crashing out of everywhere. Like, where are we blaming? Like, like, where was that? Like the last decade. Like all of a sudden now, there's like I flip on the news, a plane is flipping over somewhere. That's crazy. But anyhow, to me, my personal view, I think politically it had something to do with funding. Like having passing DEI was like a gateway to us to open the flood. You know, I'll be honest with you, I'm a conservative. Like I'm a conservative. I don't shy away from that. I come. When I look into these type of things, I'm like, this is the floodgates was open, and a lot of funding needed to happen in order, and for it to happen, a president needed to stroke his pen, and then the flood doors was going to open for funding. I mean, that's kind of like the underbelly of how why DEI is the way it is now. Because prior, I don't know, I think prior to 2012, 2010, even this wasn't really a big deal. A really big deal now is when like 2012 coming forward, and all this everything started to change, and we're like now we're all of a sudden seeing in the movies, like gays are kissing in the movies. I mean, I'm just saying, like 2008, I wasn't seeing none of that. Like, maybe it was one or two. Like now, like every Netflix special you're seeing is like, girl on girl kissing. Like come on, like is even in Hollywood. Hollywood is pushing this out, but I'm kind of getting away from our topic. But I don't know. This whole woke thing is kind of like I think it's a good wake up call that we're kind of you got to come back down to earth, guys. So politically, so to speak.
yeah, I remember Don't Ask, Don't Tell more than DEI.
Well, the thing is like I was good with repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, mainly because Don't Ask, Don't Tell was again in opposition of merit, because it was basically saying you can be gay, You just can't talk about it. And if you do, if we find out that you are gay, we can weaponize that to demote you and kick you out of the military, despite how good of a soldier you are. And the crappy thing about that is, like, from the day that I enlisted, there would be a soldier in basic training that everyone knew was gay, but he had to be extra careful to never actually say it or admit to it, because it could literally end his career. And that was a crappy thing that I felt bad for soldiers. Look, I don't agree with that lifestyle, but we're not talking about what a lifestyle I agree with. We're talking about, are you a positive to the military? Is the Army a better Army because of your service? In the case of a lot of these gay soldiers, it was. They were just trying to get along and do their job, but there was a constant threat behind them saying, hey, at any moment, your career can just end if we find out, if you ever go public with something we basically already know about you. So I was like, look, that whole don't ask, don't tell thing was just silly. I was glad that it was gone. And we can just, hey, you're a good soldier. Cool. I don't care if you're gay or not. You be you. Just show up to formation on time and pass the PT test, you know. But yeah, I don't know. Like, as far as the taking away any references to minorities that have contributed and whatnot, I do think what I'm hoping all of that is kind of the growing pains of integrating these programs. At the end of the day, it's a healthy thing for the military to be like, we don't care what your racial background is. We can celebrate it because it's like, look, obviously race plays a big role in who you are as a person. But at the end of the day, who are you as a soldier? Who are you as a sailor, as a Marine? That's what we need to focus on more so. And so, like, the emphasis on that is what we need to get back to. But I believe there is going to be a little bit of growing pains, kind of going back, trying to counter the overdone DEI practices that the military has done in recent years. And so I'm hoping that as things level out, we can get back to, let's not kid ourselves. Look, and not only that, but it's a benefit for soldiers who aren't familiar with our culture. So, for example, we've talked about this before. In the military, Polynesian and like island states and nations contribute overwhelmingly higher recruitment rates than any mainland state. That's the highest recruiting American territories are American Samoa, Hawaii, and Guam. And so how are you going to have an influx of islander people, and they're going to start integrating with a bunch of mainland white people and black people, have no idea what your culture is like? How are they going to work with these people that they have no clue where they come from? By understanding their culture better, they'll understand their battle buddies better, and become a better force for it. And so, but again, it's the DEI thing. At the heart of it, it's got to be the preferential hiring and promotion based on those things, and that's all that I care about countering. And I hope that the celebration of who we are as people, and not pretending all of a sudden that race doesn't exist, that can't be the solution, you know, and I would disagree with that. But then the other thing you said, Ati, was how long is this going to last? Well, unfortunately, we serve at the behest of the commander in chief. We've seen it change hands multiple times. So in Trump's first term, okay, before Trump came into the presidency, before 2016, the Army was actively rolling out their transgender integration program. And it was a rough rollout. Under the Obama administration, the Army was beating us over the head like every other drill. We had to have a conference where a captain came in and had to explain to us, this is what we're going to start allowing. You have to just be cool with it. You have no say in it. The end. Then what happens? Trump gets in. Mattis is Secretary of Defense. And they immediately shut that down. It all went away overnight. All those transgender integration classes were all for naught. It disappeared. But then what happened? Trump lost the next election. The Biden administration brought it back full force. They were like, hey, the Army's going to bring them in. They're not going to be deployable. We're going to pay for their transitions and all this stuff. And you just have to be cool with it. And then recruitment rates took a dive. Like, we were so hurt. Yeah, I'm not saying this is all just because of the transgender thing, but I'm saying as far as policy goes, I literally saw us going from integrating transgenders to absolutely not integrating them. Next 4 years, integrating them again. And guess what? Trump's back in office. We are now killing that program again. And the discussion is now happening. What happens with the transgenders that came into the military in that time? And I think what's probably going to happen is that if you came in during that time, you're grandfathered in. But I don't know if they'll be allowed to continue service when their current contracts are up. I don't know if that's the case. But
Come on, Chi. What do you think?
DEI. Like, I still want to get back to the root of it. Like, ask the question, what is it solving in whatever case or form? If you're for it, all right, is it solving anything? For whatever reason, you're for it. If you're against it, same deal. Like, what question are you asking about it? Like I said, I like the idea of it, but it's the implementation and parading around of it, that has me like, man, it's not really doing anything here. Like, if there were racist people or people discriminating in the HR hiring process, it didn't really solve that problem. Did it root out those people? Are those people still around? Did we hire an effective work environment when we made this hire? Did it bring cohesiveness? Did it increase production? Maybe not. Those are the serious questions. We all have our feelings and thoughts of what it brings about, the circumstances. But really, like, a lot of things that are paraded in front of people, all these programs and policies, people are quick to react and have their feelings for whatever side of the fence they sit on. But like, when it gets down to something, you got to ask the questions. You got to see what problems it's solving or it's not solving. Or if it's just a topic to talk about that's not really doing anything, we just can point at it. I'm like, yeah, we got that. But nothing's really happening. We just have this to say, hey, if you're for it, you're for the people. If you're against it, you're a racist or a bigot, So I really pay no mind to it. It's just there for me. Even though it's going away, it's like, cool. Let's keep on moving.
Yeah, all I see with DEI are the state capitals being filled with protests and nothing really coming, no real outcome coming from it, but people going to protest at capitals and not really making a real difference. But anyways, I want to pose you guys a question. You know how Hawaii and American Samoa, they have military bases there, and some of the practices are cultural. We have the Shiva-tau. They may have the haka. Do you think because DEI is now being removed, they will stop doing those war dances and stuff just to hype up the troops?
I don't see it going away. It's because it's part of unit cohesion. So if you're in Hawaii, that's where the military base is. You got Hawaiian culture there, Samoan culture there, so that's always going to be there. Specifically in that area, up here in the mainland, I doubt it. I don't see it going away in the Pacific.
That's a good question. Like I said, I don't think it will. I think a lot of the seizures of some mentions and practices, I feel like that's going to be the growing pains of trying to like get all this stuff figured out. But at the end of the day, you can't tell a culture of people they don't exist. If that's part of the cultural practice of the area, you're going to do that. It's like you do certain things when you're stationed in Hawaii, you do certain things when you're stationed in Texas. It's like saying, oh, you go to Texas, you can't barbecue or something. Like it's part of the practices of the region. And it's like at the end of the day, where let's not get too far off what the repealing of this is supposed to be. It's that you are in the military serving because you were cut out for the job, regardless of race and background. All that other stuff, because at the end of the day, when you're serving, when you're active duty or you're deployed, you don't just show up to work at a 9 to 5 with somebody. You live with those people. Like that you become who they are affects you, and so coming to understand each other better ultimately is going to be part of doing that. And that's going to be, hey, this guy is a part of a culture I was not familiar with before. I'm now more enriched for knowing that. Doesn't mean that you co-sign on everything that they do, that their practices become your practices. It's just part of understanding each other better. And so, I don't see that stuff going away on those bases. But again, what do I know?
And those type of deals, unless they called it this DEI performance before, and I don't think it'll go away. Like those were never labeled DEI, at least by my knowledge. So I think people will be all right.
Well, and this goes back to what you were mentioning earlier. T is like, let's ask the questions. What even is this stuff? What's the question we're asking here? Because a lot of these things, like doing the haka, and you show up in Hawaii and they throw a lei on you. This stuff all predated, like, even the term itself of DEI. Like, and so DEI is not the acknowledgement of other cultures. It was, again, preferential hiring and promotion based on these other factors. It was not the acknowledgement of other cultures.
Yeah, one thing that we haven't touched on is the disability. I know I read when the DEI thing first rolled out that veterans with disability would be affected, especially in those who were federal workers. But then I was reading something that as long as you have a disability, well, if you have a disability, as long as you were able to perform the duties of your job, you'll still keep your job. But then the news blew it out of proportion, saying, "Oh, now veterans and those who are disabled were going to get fired." But so far, I haven't seen that. Well, what do you guys think on that? Because DEI also involves people with disability.
I think before it rolled out, veterans always had that 10-point preference, way before DI came around. So it was meant to, I guess, level the playing field for disabled workers, especially, if you're a veteran and you had all these injuries and, all this stuff, going into the federal workforce. But specifically now, like I was saying earlier, I don't see it really affecting majority of like all the programs in the VA. There's just specific areas where like there's too many like Indians, or too many chiefs and not enough Indians and that certain like that type of deal. Like, so it's just cutting away the fat and making sure there's the quality people working. I mean, I'm just talking about the VA, but I know you were talking about like, in general for the, disability, because that's, also part of it. But I mean, honestly, if like it predates DEI, so it doesn't really affect, hiring purposes, as long as you were able to perform. Like, it goes back to the merit-based thing. If you had all these disabilities and you were able to perform, then, kudos to you, so.
I can't speak, if we're keeping it in the context of the military, like, I don't know how it'll affect programs like the VA. I don't work in those programs. I'm not a DoD civilian. I'm not a mil tech, so I can't even speak on that. All I know is that as far as the military goes, like, if you have certain disabilities, you can't join anyways. And so that's where a lot of the issues with like even the transgender integration was, because for a long time that was branded as a disability or some kind of like psychosis. And so making an exemption for them was also kind of flying in the face of what was conventional understanding of the condition before, which is another reason why it was such a hot topic. But as far as like, we're talking about physical disabilities, it's like, look, sorry, you can't run your 2-mile run time if you're on a wheelchair. It's like, there's already like, the thing about the military is that, or people have kind of I think a triggered understanding of the word discrimination. And it's like, discrimination happens with everyone, everywhere, in every company. It's like the thing that makes discrimination bad is if you discriminate on the the case of protected classes. So you can't discriminate on the basis of race. That's a protected class. On the basis of religion, on the basis of ethnicity. These are protected classes. That's why you can't discriminate based on those things. But as far as like the Army, if you're too obese, we're going to discriminate against you so you can't join. If you've got a heart condition, we discriminate against you and say you can't join. Like, it's like the military is all about discriminating people who can't make a cut based on certain things. And so I don't know how like DEI and the lifting of DEI will affect like the hiring practices for the military. That's, I think, as far as disabilities go, physical disabilities, like that's been largely unchanged even by the DEI stuff. Like there's never been an exemption that I know of where certain physical disabilities we turned a blind eye to just because we wanted you to diversify our military. I don't think that was ever a thing. So I don't think much is going to change there.
Well, the only discrimination that I faced was being a badass. I was so tired of being selected to do everything, so it got annoying.
There's so many waivers. When I joined back then, there was like waivers for this, waivers for that. Like there was tons of waivers. And, if you got in through that way, that's kind of like a green light, for, a lot of things to happen, but at the end of the day, there's certain roadblocks that prevent, if you, it was like the Spartans, back in the day, if you have certain qualities that doesn't meet the standards of joining the military. Like, for example, you can't pass the ASVAB. Like, if you can't, like, there is actually a waiver. If you can't pass the ASVAB, there's a waiver for you to get into the military, and then retake the ASVAB while you're in the military to get you MOS. Depending on what branch you're joining. But I don't know if that's a DEI thing, but I mean that was. I think still today too, there's like tons of waivers for anything, for you to get in. Like flat feet, you got flat feet, you got a waiver to get in. Physical incapabilities, you were able to get in. So there's still loopholes, So no matter how lawmakers implement things, there's always loopholes. Even I mean, I don't want to talk about it, but like that subject of the whole, the prisoners being sent down to Salvador recently, and then the judge was trying to call to stop it, but there's loopholes, tons of loopholes. That was off topic, guys. My bad.
No, actually, no. The flat foot one is actually a good example. Actually, I guess what would have been a physical disability, I guess, that the military turned a blind eye to. But I think a lot of that wasn't really so much to honor diversifying our force with flat-footed people. It's like, no, we need more people to serve, and if you can prove you're good enough to make the standard, anyways, hey, you're in. That's what those exemptions were based on. It wasn't about for the sake of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's about, hey, we're going to war. Not enough people are signing up. We need more bodies. So let's find some people to give waivers to.
Yeah, if flat feet were, one of those issues, all the Pacific Islanders wouldn't have been able to join, because I'm pretty sure a lot of us had flat feet, and the doctor who did the exam was ignoring it because I could see that there were no arches in the feet. And I think the Spartans was a bad example, Ati, because allegedly they were
Yeah,
gay.
I know.
they were gay and had male lovers, and the only time they used women for the wives was to make more Spartans. So I don't know, Ati.
That wasn't bad. Yeah, I agree. So, Doge has been going lately and kind of saving, no matter what side you're on, Doge is doing a job that I think majority of Americans been wanting to happen, was to go and audit the government. So upon that, President Trump was, hindering, passing, putting that idea of either, getting a stimulus check for 5,000 from all this money that we're saving, or is it better, if you're making 150,000 and under, it's tax free. Which would you guys prefer? That $5,000 stimulus check, or tax free? For $150,000 and under is tax free. You don't get any tax on that. Yeah. So, what do you guys think?
Can you repeat the options again? Sorry, I was.
Okay, so there's
Don't know.
two options. There's two options. So Doge is saving all this money. Trump is putting out the idea that he's thinking about doing like the stimulus check, $5,000 stimulus checks back to Americans, because of all this money that we're saving. The other idea that's been passed around is either that, or if you make $150,000 or less, that's tax free. So which one do you prefer, that stimulus or 100, getting income under $150,000 that's tax free? So if you make more than $150,000, you're taxed, pretty much. Which one do you guys prefer?
Well, for me, I would take the tax-free one, but I don't know. I'm kind of up in the air with some of this stuff. I don't have the best understanding of economic politics and stuff. So I just remember that I didn't like the idea of all these stimulus checks, even during the pandemic, because it was just, it's something that at the end of the day, just like, to my understanding, destroys the value of our dollar, because our dollar, we've gotten away from the gold standard a long time ago. Like the US's dollar has not been based on the gold standard for decades. But at the end of the day, in some ways, the value of our dollar was still somewhat tied to goods and services. But then what happened in the pandemic? They shut down your ability to make goods and provide services, but yet we still printed money and just gave it out for nothing. And so that money at the end of the day was tied to the value of nothing. That's why we saw, like, great, if I save $20,000 in my bank account, and let's say it never increases in interest, or maybe it slowly appreciates in interest, but the value of the dollar is so much less in 10 years, then my $20,000 untouched is actually worth less in 10 years than it is when I initially put it away. And that's all because we devalued our dollar. So I think, like, giving out stimulus checks, maybe that's helpful. Again, like I said, I'm a dummy when it comes to political economics. I know this is saying, hey, look, this is an already taxed dollar. That's where this money came from. We're not literally talking about printing new dollars from the Federal Reserve. But I think it's reckless if we're playing a little fast and loose with, like, hey, here's free money from the government. As far as the non-tax thing, that'd be good. But again, now it's like, dude, are we really being conservatives at this point? Because I thought that was always the leftist point of view, is tax the rich. It's like, hey, if you make over $150,000, you get taxed. Everybody else gets no tax. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm up in the air with all of this because I don't understand the long-term implementations of these policies. But again, that's not me decrying them and saying they're bad, but my understanding is very low. And so, like, look, if I'm picking one of those two, I'll just take the tax-free so I can just hold on to the dollars that I make. But I think a stimulus check I'd probably just waste the money faster than I should anyway. So buy something dumb. Buy a lot of skins on Marvel Rivals.
I would take the stimulus check because I just calculated my annual salary, threw in 7, maybe 12% tax, and it kind of averages at $5,000 for taxes if they were to take it, if it was tax free. So it wouldn't really matter. Plus, I'm the kind of person who wants to see the money in front of me, so I would be that person to take the $5,000, and I wouldn't care about our government and our taxes and all that stuff because we're still trillions of dollars in debt. So what's $5,000 given to every American really gonna do to us? Because I don't think the U.S. is gonna solve their trillions of dollars in debt anytime soon. Because after Trump, maybe a Democrat will be elected and the floodgates will be open and USAID will be established again, and all the money will be funding terrorists and all the international countries and all that. So to me, it really doesn't matter. I would get that $5,000 stimulus check and be happy with my life because, YOLO. We don't live that long anyway.
Give Samantha some lessons on how to cook your ramen better, I guess.
Yeah, I'm good with either one. I've been a good boy with my 5 bullet points for the past couple weeks. So, hey, I'm a peasant, dog. I'm on the lower end of the pay scale. Give me money. Yeah, and like Spencer, I don't know anything about our economical situation. I'm not even gonna try to act like I do. All I know is me and my 4 kids and my wife would take whatever.
Yeah, honestly, when it comes down to it, we are taxed, man, heavily. You tax on your income, you tax on you when you die, you tax on Social Security that you get. Everything's getting taxed, man. And then, you know, with this whole Doge thing coming out and going through all the books, and looking through everything, it just goes to show that all the money that we make as hard earners, all the money that we make, in our lifetime is being, handed, fraudulently. Like it's proven, fraudulently being handled. So I would say I would actually like both. I would actually like my stimulus, and I would actually like, not
Y'all
getting
cheating.
taxed.
Y'all cheating.
Hey, come on, man. Like there's a area right there I forgot to mention all the above. So I'll go option C, all the above. Now I would get the 50.
Ati knows Elon like that.
I'll get the 5,000, and then if getting that tax free money is great too. Yeah, hopefully it does. But with the IRS still being the IRS, I doubt the 150,000 not taxed will happen in this lifetime. So it's just hopes and dreams. So I guess with that said, I really appreciate you fellas, hopping on tonight, taking your time out of your busy lives to hop on and have a little conversation for our audience, and for all of those out there. If you guys have any questions or complaints or comments, feel free to hit us up on all social media platforms. Without further ado, you guys have a good night and take care.
Working on my interests, it's who I am. I'm trying to make these digits look like EINs. When the help ain't free, you all help me. Salute to folks who turn their names to LLCs. The wealth is in itself to help a non-profit. To be better women or better men, whether business by veterans or common folks with a dream. We're all born with the same strength. We tread waters that were untouched. Let's be on the same wavelength. Behind the lava, front of our eyes. Let our legacy live off it when we're up in the sky. All signs point to us to help someone make a difference. With God as my witness, cause talk business.